Well, hello and thanks for watching. This is a overview of glycolysis, which is the first step in cellular respiration. My students are currently preparing for a quiz over cellular respiration, which is why the title of the document there is Cellular Respiration Quiz Diagrams. And if you're just watching to review, that's great. You don't have to worry about a quiz, but my students are studying and preparing for the AP Biology exam. So the goal of this video is to explain the purposes of basically all of the reactions in cellular respiration for the purpose of studying for the AP Biology exam. And because we're studying for the AP exam, and hopefully for future college biology, and maybe even for taking the MCAT or an exam like that, and maybe a subject level SAT, what we really need to know about cellular respiration is really just the inputs and the takeouts of this reaction. We need to know the product and the reaction, the reactants. So what I'm going to focus on is starting with glucose and ending with a compound called pyruvate. We're also going to follow along with some of the other compounds that we see in the cellular respiration equation. And if you're not familiar with the cellular respiration equation, you might remember C6H12O6 is glucose. And we also have to add in some oxygen. And you're going to end up with 6 carbon dioxides and 6 water molecules. That is supposed to be an O, sorry about that. So we're going to be following along with these products and reactants throughout the whole time we're talking about cellular respiration. We're not going to see all of those, however, during glycolysis, but we'll try to make sure we keep track of everything throughout this whole process. So this is the first video in explaining cellular respiration. There will be several more following this because we're going to break it down into separate pieces. So to start off with, we need to start with glucose, which is a 6 carbon molecule. So I'm going to go ahead and draw glucose with 6 carbon molecules. I'm leaving out the hydrogen and oxygen just because it clutters the diagram, and what we're really focusing on is glycolysis. The word glycolysis means sugar splitting. So we're going to be splitting glucose into 2 parts. So our product at the end here is going to be 2 molecules of a compound called pyruvate, and that pyruvate is going to be sent over to the very next step in cellular respiration. So I'm going to go ahead and draw out basically this little diagram here is just showing us the important parts of glycolysis. It's actually a 10-step process, and for the purposes of the AP exam, you really don't have to have all 10 steps memorized. You just need to be able to describe an overview. Alright, so I'm going to stop here with this pyruvate molecule, and it's important to note that glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. It is not taking place in the mitochondria as of yet. We will get to the mitochondria eventually, but right now we're in the cytoplasm of the cell. The glucose is found there. It's brought into the cell from the food that an organism eats, or if we're talking about a plant, then it's made during photosynthesis. So the glucose is broken down first with the investment of 2 ATP molecules. As you know, ATP is the energy molecule of the cell, and that energy is stored in the bonds between phosphates. So one of those phosphates will break off and release energy and help us get this reaction going, and we call that the investment phase. And then later, as this glucose molecule is repeatedly modified by a series of enzymes, we're going to end up making 4 ATP molecules, and we call that the payoff phase of glycolysis. Additionally, as glucose is modified, we're going to take this molecule called NAD. It's an electron carrier. And in biology, when we say electron carrier, we're really just talking about carrying around hydrogen atoms. And as you're aware, hydrogen is just 1 proton and 1 electron. So in biology and in living systems, when we talk about carrying electrons, we're actually going to carry the electron and its proton. So NAD, the electron carrier, is picking up hydrogens from this glucose molecule that's being modified. And it's going to take those hydrogens and carry them to another phase of cellular respiration called the electron transport chain. And we'll get to that in a separate video later. So the result, after all of these modifications have been made, is 2 pyruvate molecules, and there is some water released during one of those. It's the 8th step of the 10 steps of glycolysis. There is some water released. So eventually, what you really need to know at the, overall here is that glucose is going to be broken down into 2 pyruvate molecules, 4 ATP are made, however 2 are used. And then, sorry about that, let me just pause the video in the right place. And then we're going to have 2 NAD molecules picking up hydrogens and forming 2 NADHs. Those NADHs, when we add the hydrogen on there, we call that, you've heard of a redox reaction. Oxidation is losing, reduction is gaining. So when we gain a hydrogen, we're actually being reduced. So NAD is reduced to NADH. And again, we're going to use the NADH, and we're going to take those hydrogens over to be used as a source of potential energy later on. So that's a basic overview of glycolysis, and keep watching the next series of videos to see the rest of cellular respiration.